Welcome back to part 2. We're going to hopefully finish it up in this episode. I got it out there drying in the sun because I decided to pressure wash it because this guy has been leaking. And we're going to swap a bunch of this stuff onto this block, and then we'll just jump right into putting it back on the chassis. So let's get started. So my original plan, guys, was to just sort of swap over all of this stuff onto this engine and then go back to recording, putting it back on the machine, because that's the main point of this video, is the engine swap. But I got to thinking about something. And if you're thinking about getting a Sears tractor, or if you're already got a couple of them but you've never thought of this, it's going to be kind of, I guess it's going to be useful. But there's a few things that go on, which this is your clutch, which most of y'all are going to know that, but if you don't, that's your clutch. You know, you press the pedal, that goes down, you release the pedal, that comes up, tensions the belt, all that magic. They're pretty bad about this hole wallowing out. I've already repaired this years ago, but there you see in the light how it's the paint ends and it's been hot, and then I've drilled out. The original setup was just a bent rod that would ride in that hole as this went up and down. Well, Ziggy Cat, I'm trying to record. Anyway, but that's a thin point for a rod to be on. So over the years, the friction and stuff will wear into the rod and into this. And more often than not, you're going to end up having to repair it like this, which basically you grind everything smooth, you fill it all in with weld, then you drill and tap a hole, and it doesn't matter too much where the hole is, but if you want to try to put it where it was originally, which is about this area. You don't want to go too low, but I mean, on the tractor, it's pretty easy to, because this is how it'd be on the tractor. So you have your hole right about there, about, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch down. But like I say, it varies from model to model a little bit, but they're all pretty similar. The next thing I have found is there's a needle bearing in here. You pull this pin out and this slides out, and then there's an actual legitimate needle bearing in there. Sometimes that thing has exploded, which this one I replaced when I did this repair, because that's what happened to me. That had exploded, the pedal had gotten squeaky. It'll work. I mean, you drive it around for years and never know. But what'll happen is it'll get squeaky, it'll have a hitch in it, and it'll wear on this pin. So if you're ever in here, it's 100% worth your time to take all of this apart, clean it up, and potentially replace that needle bearing and do this weld repair. You can kind of see my welding there because, you know, I'm super good at welding. I don't have a part number for the needle bearing. If I ever find one, I will make a video talking about it because I want to try to bring as much information to the table as I can. But these are just some things to think about, kind of like cracks along in here. I had one that the pedal didn't feel right, and when I took it apart, all of this had broke and I had to replace this piece. I don't think that's super common, so I don't know that I would necessarily fret about that, but it's something to think about nonetheless. But all right, now that that's out of the way, I'm gonna go back to swapping parts over. See y'all in a minute. Don't you love it when the spark plug has the grounding tang just facing exactly opposite of where the combustion chamber is? Well, technically this is the combustion chamber, but like the piston's over here. I don't think it matters. There are some people who will shim their plug around where this is open to the rest of the cylinder. I personally have never cared. I just thought this was interesting that the tang is facing basically opposite of what you would think. But we might experiment a little bit and see if it makes any performance difference. Anyway, back to the show. All right, we got this cleaned up. Still a little wet, but that's okay. We'll wipe it down. I gave this thing a pressure washing, as you may have seen earlier in the video. And we got this guy dressed out and ready to reassemble. And guys, I trust the guy I bought this engine from, but I know very little about the history of this thing. So, guess we're gonna gamble together. I do like that it has this muffler on it though. This is the style of muffler that's supposed to be on this year machine. But let me get the camera resituated and we'll get started. So this is a perfect time to show this. You see the action there? That is the clutch on a Sears. And this isn't necessarily a big secret, but this is the factory link rod. You see, it goes on like this, and the long part on the bottom acts as a belt guide when you're in the disengaged position. If I'm remembering correctly, I believe that's how that works. Because see, the way that belt goes in here, let's pull this around, and I want to try to show you this, because this is actually something that makes using one of these and working on one of these really nice. Okay, see how that belt is ran? When you're in the disengaged position, this long piece on the bottom helps sort of guide that loose belt as it's flopping around before it comes to a stop. And then of course this up here acts on this piece to push it down and release the belt. And what I have done, and a lot of people have done this, but if you've never seen it before, those are rod ends, not unlike your steering links. You can take the original rod, cut and thread them on each end, and put those in there. And that basically eliminates the wear that I talked about earlier on this plate. And you can extend using a nut or something. You can make this down here long enough to guide that belt. I personally have never had any trouble. I've never had belts never jumped, gone missing, or anything. So that is something that a lot of us do in the Sears groups to repair a squeaky, worn out, and just to repair a clutch. So put that in mind, and just, if you ever get a Sears and have that issue, it can be a lifesaver. This made a huge difference in the performance of this machine. Much smoother clutch. It squeaks a little less. It squeaks a little less. All right, more thoughts as I put this together. Remember this bracket from the original episode? Well, you don't notice this stuff coming when you're coming apart. As you go back together, the way they built these things, you put the engine in, you have to leave everything loose until everything has come into play. Which I'm about to put the flywheel on, which then lets me seal this up, which then lets me tighten all of the head bolts, which then lets me tighten this down relative to this, which then lets me tighten down the engine mounting bolts. But you have to have them all in place, because if you just do one at a time, they end up misaligned, and you got to loosen them back up. So if you ever do tackle one of these, if you're any kind of mechanically inclined, this really isn't going to be that big of a deal, but it's definitely something you need to consider. You can't see for the light, but there's two nuts under here that hold this on. And like I said, that's part of the frame structure, because you have the joining of this piece to this piece to this piece, and then up here, this through the engine sort of acts as the upper structure. And I don't know how big of a difference it really makes unless you're pushing a snow blade or if you have a front end loader on it. Because a mowing deck, you're never going to notice that. Or rear attachments, I don't know that you're really going to notice that either. But I have loosened one up enough where it will flex and watched, and the frame does experience these forces, so there must be a reason for that. But oh well. But anyway, all right, more progress to come. I keep forgetting to mention, this is the electronics ignition system that I used, which all that does is go to the ignition coil, and then you send battery power to that, and then the flywheel going past this tells it what to do. And that is Overnight Solutions. I don't know if he's still in business or not, but this is a really good way to go if you're not wanting to mess around with Tecumseh's weird apparatus here and then the coil that goes here. So it's food for thought. It's just my opinion. You do not have to follow it. Anyway, moving on. Now that I've done all of that annoying work of making all of that line up, I can now start the horrendous and tedious process of tightening all the bolts down. And if you're not a patient person, this process can drive you absolutely out of your mind. All right, I'm gonna bring you in here. Now, if you don't know anything about a starter generator, well, you're about to know almost something more. All right, most of the time you have like an A or an S, and then you'll have an F, like frog. That's your field, and then this is your generator slash starter. You turn the key on to start, battery power goes here, you whir the motor over. When you let off as the engine runs, the regulator sends power here, and then this becomes your charging port. It's a pretty neat system. They're a little weak. They only make like 13.2 to 13.5. You can make them make 14 volts, but they're really happy usually like 13.3. And for something like this where headlights is all it's really going to run besides charging the battery, they're perfectly fine. Their biggest drawback is that parasitic load of driving this thing is, I mean, that's 25% of the size of the engine. I mean, look at that. That's their biggest drawback. They're heavy. This weighs as much as my wife. You know, 80, 100, 102 pounds, something like that. But you know, it's whatever. But on a Sears tractor, and this has been consistent as far as I can tell, but I'm not going to tell you that it is 100% every tractor, but usually this green wire is going to be your field wire. If it goes straight to one tang on the regulator, it's going to be your field wire. And that's important because you don't want to get them crossed, because then it's going to become a microwave and it's going to turn you into your warmed over pizza or whatever, and you'll burst into flames and your family will be very sad and it'll be a big mess to clean up. You don't want to do that. No, I'm kidding. I am kidding. It won't charge and it might not start. In fact, I don't think it does start. I think if you get them reversed, it just kind of hums and becomes radioactive. Just kidding again. It doesn't become radioactive, but you get the point, because you don't really want to send battery power to your field side. You'll end up causing yourself some headaches. Kind of like when you don't grab the right wrench for the job and then start talking with the camera recording. And then realize that you ran off with the wrench to put into another Sears that you bought over the weekend that you're going to make a video on at some point in the future, but you can't right now because you haven't finished this project. I'm not speaking from personal experience or anything. I'm just kind of thinking out loud. All right. You don't want to go cranking down real hard on these either. You just want to get them snug. It's not a high vibration environment. You don't have to worry about them coming loose. And even if they do come loose, the worst they're going to do is, well, you won't charge. Which on a starter generator is already a kind of a common thing. They tend to be pretty finicky when it comes to charging systems. The regulators will just kind of stop regulating and then there you are. Which, fortunately, The auction website that starts with an E is pretty good about having the regulators, and they're like $50 now, which is annoying, but everything's expensive. I mean, it's like we're paying a tax for living in our country. But anyway, I don't want to get political. All right, I'm gonna hate that I said that in the editing process, but whatever. All right, now these really are kind of a pain because you gotta get them in there and hope that you don't pinch your fingers or something. I'm genuinely impressed that I didn't pinch my fingers, if I'm being honest with you. All right. Line the hole up, and boom. Now we're in. And this part is terrible too, because now this is exactly why I didn't record a lot of the reassembly, because there's a whole lot of me getting into the yoga positions trying to reach everything, because, you know, they didn't put it in convenient places. But they weren't really expecting you to have to work on it very often either, because, let's be honest, these are decently reliable machines. Like I said in the first video, this thing is 55 years old. How many engine swaps do you think it really has had in 55 years? I mean, we really only have the benefit of knowing that's the original engine because the family that sold it to me were pretty honest and forthcoming with the history of the machine. And I'm thankful for that. But like, I suspect that most of these Sears tractors are running on their original or maybe their second engine. And I would think the second engine is probably not that common. So I will deal with things being hard to get to if I only have to get to them once, or if at all. So, all right, I've got some boring stuff to do, like hooking up the ground wire here and the throttle cable here, which the throttle cable kind of sucks because you have to do some witchcraft to make it reach. But, you know, there's really nothing special to inform you there. So I'm going to do that and finish the starter generator up, and we'll come back when it's time to put the belt on, install the other peripherals, and then we're going to twist on the key and see if something will happen. All right, guys, this is the most nerve-wracking part for me. This is the initial startup. We've got oil, we've got gas, we got belt, we've got compression, spark plug is tight. So I'm gonna give it a little throttle, give it a little choke. Let's see what happens. smokes more than I want it to, and there's a tapping noise in there, which I'm almost certain is a sticky valve. There's a bit of a pop and a little bit of blue smoke. Pretty sure we got a sticky valve in here, which I'll live with it. But if anybody knows a good small engine machinist, let me know. I'd like to have the original engine reworked, bored over, whatever it needs. I think it's got a standard piston in it. We're going to take a look at it in another video, but I want to rebuild it and put it back in this tractor. This is a machine that I eventually hope to restore one day, but shiny paint doesn't fix the mechanical issues. So, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I'm a working man. Money's not always there, but you know. Anyway, so that concludes part 2 of the engine swap. It isn't quite. Can you not see I'm busy? I guess he doesn't care. Anyway, wasn't quite as victorious as I wanted it to be. I really did want I wanted it to kind of fire off and run and not smoke and not have a ticking noise in it. And well, it's a 55-year-old engine. I really don't have the right to ask that much out of it. So, but it'll work. I can use this to plow and do whatever, and it'll get me through. But anyway, stay tuned. I'm gonna post more videos as stuff happens in the shop, and I'm gonna try to bring you along with me. I've got a tiller project coming up that I think some of y'all will find interesting. But don't get comfortable. I gotta turn the camera off. This cat, Ziggy cat, I love him. Good boy. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys.